When you get a cut, your body naturally starts healing. You don't even have to think about it. It just kind of happens.
But if something gets inside that cut, if there is something preventing the cut from healing, it can get infected.
This little cut suddenly becomes a big deal.
Trauma is that something. It becomes the thing that can prevent someone from healing from a major or even minor life event.
Your body does have natural ways to not dwell on events or conflicts from one day to another, but trauma prevents the wound from closing. It makes it vulnerable, open, sensitive.
In today's podcast, we take a deep dive into eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR therapy, to help unlock the body's natural ability to sort through trauma and find healing.
I'm Clem Malley.
And I'm Lindsay Vass.
And this is Real Common Treatable, a real talk podcast about overcoming mental health, addiction, and substance abuse challenges.
Talk to Patty Dirilten for 10 seconds and you'll see that she is super passionate about trauma, especially EMDR.
So I am Patty Dirilten, and I am an outpatient therapist, psychotherapist, and I am also an owner of the Center for Insight and Connection. And mostly what I do is I treat trauma. I believe that, not just me, but EMDR therapists are taught to believe that just about any presentation of a mental health issue is rooted in trauma or negative experiences, earlier negative experiences. So there are past experiences that teach people negative beliefs about themselves, and it's those negative beliefs that then drive the presentation of anxiety, depression, PTSD, eating disorders, addictions, pretty much the majority of things in the DSM.
By the way, the DSM stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
So working out trauma is important, but one thing Patty didn't think about early on in her practice was how regular talk therapy could possibly do more harm than good.
When you're doing regular talk therapy and you're talking about experiences, I think it runs the risk of re-traumatizing, because what we have found is that trauma exists in 3 different parts of the brain. And when we're just doing regular talk therapy, we're just getting to one part of the brain. When I was working in substance abuse world primarily, I saw a lot of people with major, huge, big T traumas, and then on top of it, little t traumas. And at the time, I was not specialized in trauma yet. And I was doing the best I can with my CADC and really doing a lot of very good addiction work. But now that I reflect back, what I was actually doing was connecting with people and helping them just maybe even talk about their trauma for the very first time. But that's all we were doing, was talking about it. So we would have these sessions with all of these things would be brought up. And it was like we were bringing them all up, and then we were like having to stuff them back in. And there was no resolution to that trauma. There was no healing of it. And so there was a little bit of reprieve, I think, like from the fact that they could maybe tell their story for the first time. It definitely wasn't for nothing. But now that I understand trauma the way that I do, I think maybe even in a few cases I was re-traumatizing my client.
As Patty worked with trauma more and more, she wanted to be able to make sure she was helping people move past their trauma and not just relive it in their sessions. That's when she started to go deep into EMDR therapy.
EMDR, eye movement desensitization, reprocessing. It's an experiential therapy that targets maladaptively stored material in the brain. So Francine Shapiro was the originator. She discovered EMDR therapy by herself. It was in the 80s, and she had struggled with something in her relationship or something in her life, and she went for a walk. And as she was walking, she was looking left to right on the sidewalk in front of her not even methodically, it was just something she was noticing about herself. And so she began to explore that and look and was saying, okay, wow, I feel better when is it the walk? Is it me looking back and forth? And she started to question this. So then she started to study it because she was a therapist herself, and she began to put together experiments. And so now we have many random controlled studies that really uphold our understanding of how it works.
Part of the research theorizes that EMDR mimics what our body does in REM, or rapid eye movement sleep. During REM sleep, most scientists agree that your body is doing a whole bunch of processing.
Yeah, basically, it's like going through all the stuff you did that day and saying, okay, I need to remember this, or I can forget that. It's kind of like a computer clearing the cache so that it can continue to have processing power and space.
With REM sleep, it's a very active sleep cycle, a sleep stage. So what you're doing, and that is part of the body's way of taking information and moving it through to go, what do we do with this, right? Where do we store this? If this thing happened, do we store it in this part of the brain? Do we get rid of it? What are we doing? What are we doing? We dream about the things that happened to us. Everybody's dreaming whether we remember those dreams or not.
To be clear, we still don't fully know why EMDR works. We just know that it does. We still don't have the technology to fully measure what's happening in the brain. So when you hear Patty talking about EMDR as a hypothesis, that's why.
And I think the model that is explaining why EMDR works, that is one way, one hypothesis, is that we're literally taking that REM sleep and replicating it and taking material through it and replicating what goes on in REM sleep. And that is the part we don't understand fully. That's the part where we can't we don't have the technology yet to be able to look at the brain and go, okay, what exactly is happening when we take this material and we put this bilateral stimulation? We get the brain to connect to each other and understand what's going on, because you get this shift that happens at the end of it.
Let's break down that term, bilateral stimulation. Obviously, we can't do therapy in our sleep. So one part of EMDR is recreating that cadence of your eyes shifting back and forth during REM sleep while you're still awake.
So the bilateral stimulation is really just a part of a much larger comprehensive approach. I use buzzers. I usually use tactile bilateral stimulation, where these two things are held in the hand and then they get turned on and there's a buzzing, like a buzz, bzz, bzz, bzz.
The buzzers held in each hand buzz the left hand and then the right hand, creating bilateral or across the body stimulation.
There's multiple different kinds of bilateral stimulation. Traditionally, when Francine Shapiro first started this, it was bilateral stimulation where you would have somebody follow your fingers across the midline. That's the replication of the REM sleep. But that stage of sleep where your eyes are, it's an active stage of sleep where your eyes are crossing a midline. So that's what the bilateral stimulation is. So originally it was the eye movement, and then they moved even to a light bar.
Here, people would follow a light from left to right. And Lindsay, I don't know if this crossed your mind, but EMDR kind of reminds me of that old-timey hypnosis thing with the pocket watch.
Look into my eyes.
Yeah, I could see that, like a Jafar from Aladdin situation.
Exactly. So I had to ask, is EMDR a form of hypnotism?
It's not, although I recently attended a CEU about hypnosis. And we actually had such a good conversation because there was some overlap with some of the concepts, but the formal answer is no, EMDR is not hypnosis. What's really needed for this to be effective is the client's ability to dual focus, to be able to have one foot in reality in my office and the other one in the memory and the material. So that person has to be very conscious. So even like when you're working with dissociation, this is a very good treatment with clients who present with dissociation issues, because you're helping them orient themselves to safety and in their body and being able to be completely present while also in the same space accessing pain. So you need absolute consciousness in order to be able to engage in EMDR. So no, hypnosis is not the same as EMDR.
Okay, so EMDR is definitely different from hypnosis because you play an active part in the process. You can't be in a subconscious state to process your trauma.
Right. And there's actually 8 stages to EMDR, and you'll see that this whole bilateral stimulation is only a part of it. And to help us understand it, we asked Patty to walk us through the 8 stages using a big T trauma example.
Imagine you are walking through the woods with your family on a hiking trip. It's a beautiful day, the weather is nice, and you've been out for a couple of hours enjoying the fresh air.
It's getting late, so you and the fam are headed back to the car just as the sun is beginning to set and the crickets are starting to chirp.
Suddenly, a giant scary bear steps into your path and you are terrified.
Bear jumps out in front of me. My system goes into fight or flight. I'm bear spraying, I'm yelling and screaming, trying to protect my kids. And the bear runs away. I'm okay, everybody's safe. We go about our vacation, it's fine. So several months later, I go for a hike near my home in Illinois, and there's a rustling in the woods. And the rustling triggers my body to act as if a bear is coming out of the brush. So what's happening there is that the past is informing the present, and that material is maladaptively stored in my brain. The bear incident is maladaptively stored in my brain because it can't hook up with the very adaptive material that I live in Illinois, and there are no bears in Illinois.
So now we have a coping mechanism, not a great one either. It stresses us out, and it's not even connected with context. Even when there's no bears around, it's impossible for us to enjoy nature without fearing danger around every bend.
This brings us to stage 1 of EMDR, taking your history.
If I was to go to an EMDR therapist, that EMDR therapist would take my history, would understand why I'm getting triggered while I go on hikes. I would come in and maybe that would be my presenting issue. Oh my gosh, I can't go on hikes. I can't even walk on sidewalks. I'm so anxious, and maybe even I'm starting to stay in my house more. I'm avoiding going out into the community. And so my EMDR therapist might say, okay, interesting. And she'd be taking a history. And what she would find in that history is that I had that incident with the bear. So she and I would discover that the bear incident is what's causing my anxiety and my avoidance symptoms in the present. So then she would target that bear memory, because that's what would be informing those symptoms in the present. And when we say target, these are the next phases, right? So she would prepare me. So phase 1 is history taking. And then she would prepare me and make sure that I was able to state change.
What's important to remember here is that this therapy needs to be done without re-traumatizing someone.
Yes, and this brings us to stage 2, which is the preparation stage. Here, the therapist is making sure that once this stuff is brought up, you have the tools you need to not let it trigger you in a negative way. Patty describes 2 state change exercises that are often done to help clients prepare for the work.
There's 2 that were taught in our basic training, and this is where I think this part is so very important. So the first one is the container exercise. And what we're doing is we're teaching people to be able to diffuse. It's diffusion. It's a visualization of diffusion. So we're helping people to say, okay, I have this container that you leave in my office that has a lid on it. So we can put unfinished business material, thoughts, emotions into that container so that when you leave my office, you're not leaving here in any kind of disturbed state. That would be one example. The other example is calm place or safe place, which basically is another visualization that we do with bilateral stimulation, which is the eye movement part. And that is basically a visualization where we help someone step into a state of relaxation, and they visualize a calmer, safe place. And we have them feel deeper into their bodies and their nervous systems, a state of relaxation, so that we have that to go to. It's already established when we're accessing disturbing material.
So remember in Fight Club when the main character creates a calm, peaceful, cold cave to deal with the cancer that he doesn't have? This is kind of like that, minus the penguin animal guide.
Once there has been some prep work, phase 3 is assessment, and it covers very specific questions that a therapist asks about the trauma someone is about to work through.
So if it's the bear memory, the therapist says, okay, what's the worst part? What's the image of the worst part? What's the negative belief about yourself? This is such an amazing tool. And this is where I gave you the offshoot of beliefs and thoughts. So what's the negative belief? So in this particular case, the negative belief is I'm not safe, right? I'm not safe. And so the positive belief is I am safe. The validity of cognition is then measured. How true do those words sound? I am safe when you experience this memory now. Oh, it doesn't feel true at all. What are you talking about? I don't feel safe at all. The bear almost got me. What are you talking about, lady? So the validity of cognition is measured. And so as a clinician, you're wanting that you're trying to get that person to understand the negative belief and the positive belief there. That's what's there. And that comes in later. So that's the positive belief. We assess the validity of cognition, and then we identify what the feelings are. What are the feelings that you experience as you experience this memory now? Panic, fear, like disbelief, like I'm so scared, right? So that's the emotion. Those are the emotions. And then I'm assessing the subjective unit of disturbance, the SUD. And that is that scale of 0 to 10. How disturbing is this material to you now? So as I'm experiencing the bear memory, it's probably an 8 or 9. So it's that high out of 10. 0 to 10, 10's the worst, 0's none at all. And then where do I feel that disturbance in my body? I feel it in my stomach and in my hands and feet. So those are the assessment questions. We're getting that material activated.
This reminds me of a controlled explosion or a controlled burn. You know that you're going to be working with some potentially dangerous stuff. So it's important to understand that stuff, or in this case, trauma, and to prepare the environment so that it doesn't get out of hand.
Right. I see what you're saying. So the fire doesn't spread uncontrollably, or so the explosion doesn't hurt yourself or anyone when it goes out.
Exactly. And when we come back, we're going to navigate that exact moment. How does an EMDR trained therapist activate a trauma, help them process it, and work through it to provide healing?
This podcast is brought to you by Sandstone Care. Sandstone Care helps teens, young adults, and their families overcome substance abuse, addiction, and mental health challenges. They provide age-specific, full continuum of care from residential to intensive outpatient services, including EMDR therapy. Change is possible, and Sandstone Care is here to help.
Now that the therapist has activated the trauma, it's time to bring the client through it. So what does that even look like?
This is phase 4, or desensitization or bilateral stimulation. Remember the eyes going back and forth or hand buzzers going left to right? That's where these really come in.
If we go back to me with the bear memory, we've activated the bear memory. I'm sitting with the disturbance. I have the image, I have my feelings, I have my cognitive belief, and I'm feeling it in my body. So I'm activated. And then the bilateral stimulation comes in. And what it does is the idea is it reduces, it desensitizes the fear. So EMDR, right? Eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing. Throughout this that whole phase, that therapist is going to do a set of bilateral stimulation. And then the person, me being the client, my therapist might say, okay, Patty, what do you notice now? And at first, maybe I start out really high as an 8. And as I do after my first set, I might go, oh, it's not, I feel a little more relaxed. Okay. So then my therapist might say, okay, Patty, what's the worst part now? And it just opens the whole picture.
Here, the therapist is asking specific questions to activate the memory or trauma, but then other questions to reorient them back into their body and in a safe place. And throughout these sets, we have some interesting things that start happening.
So it might, now it's different for everybody. This is just an example of, oh, I can see the details. I can see the specific kinds of trees. I know what side of the path the bear came out of. I know my children. Maybe I begin to orient myself to the sounds my children are making. So the memory can initially become more vivid. And so after a few more sets, she might say, okay, what do you notice now? Oh, I noticed the image is getting fuzzier, or I noticed that the kids ran to the car. I noticed that the bear has left the pathway. So sometimes when you're reprocessing, it can go chronological. Sometimes the thoughts are different. Sometimes the sensations are different. It just depends on each individual and their own processing system. So let's say, for example, that I'm just orienting to the memory. It gets vivid through this space 4, and then it begins to close down. And it's, oh, okay. So then she returns me back to the original memory. When you go back to the original memory, what's the disturbance? Oh, it's like a 4. I don't know what you did to me, but it's a 4. I don't know why it's a 4, but it's a 4. It doesn't feel so bad anymore. And then the therapist might ask me, what is still disturbing?
Oftentimes, when we get stuck in a panic spiral, we are not thinking logically, we are thinking for survival. But with EMDR, we allow logic, facts, insight, and context to mix with our memories and actually process our stuff instead of staying in a panic spiral.
What's upholding that 4? Oh, that this bear could have taken my children's lives. Like, how scary that is. Oh, as a mother, that would just be, I can't even think about it. So where do you feel that in your body? And now I get another set. And that gets hooked up to some more adaptive material. Like maybe my children are older and they can run away. Or, hey, I remember a time when my kid had a negative experience with a person and got out, right? Now that's more adaptive material that my children can keep themselves safe, separate from me. They're at school all day. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. I taught them how to keep themselves safe. So that might be another piece of adaptive material that then settles my 4, right? And all that's happening, the therapist, this is an experiential therapy. So there is not a lot of talking and processing verbally during this time. These are all things and insights that I'm just gaining as that client. And then the therapist's job is really just to just keep returning me back. Different times we're trained as therapists to know, okay, when do we let it just expand? When do we need to contain it? When do we just let the brain and body just basically heal itself? Because that's what we're doing. And so at the end, or she's watching the SUD come down and now she assesses it again. Hey, Patty, 0 to 10, how disturbing is this for you? And I'm like, it's 0. Like, I seriously don't feel anything anymore. Not like I was 10 minutes ago where my disturbance was 8. It seriously, legitimately is 0. And then, so that would be the desensitization phases. We get that memory down to 0. We get it down to an ecological place, as low as it can go, 0 or 1. And I will almost always get it to a 0. I'll push that a little bit with my people because I feel like that 1 can even mean maybe it's something else is upholding it. So I will most of the time get that memory down to a 0.
Maybe you're thinking, cool, now that the trauma is at a 0, I should be good, right? But remember, we're only halfway. Stage 5 is called the installation phase.
After desensitization and we get the SUD down to 0, then we go into installation and we install the positive beliefs. The person, or in this example, me, I'll hold the buzzers and I'm pairing, it's like a conditioned response, right? So we're pairing I am safe now with original memory, and we're putting those two things together. And we do that until we measure the validity of cognition as a 7. 7 is completely true. Yes, I am safe now feels completely true when I experience this memory now. So we call it 0 to 7. We call it zeroing the memory, and we're getting that 7 as that positive belief. So that's installation.
It's not enough to just get the trauma memory of safety to a 0 or 1. There also needs to be a formal installation of the positive belief that you are safe.
Yeah, you actually need to believe that this is true, not just not feel scared.
The next phase is phase 6, and that's a body scan. So the body scan is, I want you to take the original memory and I want you to put it with I'm safe now, stick them together, and take that pairing head to toe and let me know if there's any disturbance that comes up. So we're also checking in with the body there to make sure that there's no disagreement.
Think of this like checking the house before you leave to make sure that you didn't forget anything before a long trip.
Except instead of your keys, you're making sure that no trauma is left hanging around before you move to phase 7, which is locking up or closing the memory down.
So phase 7 is closing the memory down. So if I am working with somebody and we got that SUD from an 8 to a 4, I don't want them walking out of my office as a 4. So what I'm doing is containing. So I will close it down in 3 ways. So I'll have them imagine a leaf blower, and I will have them leaf blow the past back in the past. Just as we were able to bring the past into the present, we're going to put the past back in the past. So I want you to leaf blow the past back into the past. That would be the first way. The second way would be for me to say, I want you to take just a body scan and tell me if there's anything that's still disturbing you in relationship to the work we did today. And I just want you to leaf blow it off of you and put it in your container. And then the last part is, and I always find that this is so helpful, is I'll say, what's the gain today? Now disturbance is gone. What's the gain today? So many things, right? And it helps when we're doing this EMDR. It's like, it's so abstract. There's so many things. It's so much happening in this very small period of time that like, it's so hard even to just walk out of a session. You're like, whoa, what just happened? So it's a really great way to make what just happened concrete. And we're going to pluck one thing out to go, oh wait, I do have power, or I'm a worthy human, or I am safe. I can see that now. I might not be all the way there, but I can see what's trying to onboard.
Last, we have phase 8, the reevaluation phase. This usually comes into play for the next session.
When that person comes back, I am going to reevaluate the memory. And I'm never going back into the container and saying, let's pull that out and let's go back to where we left off. Because the brain's going to continue to work on that material in that week. A few times I've had active dreamers. And so maybe they were having a recurring dream in this way. And through this EMDR process, their dreams change in relationship to that recurring nightmare or dream. And now they're not having it, or it's changed, or enacting the power that they do have. It's so cool. So I'm never going back to where we left off. I'm saying, okay, where is this memory now? Tell me what the worst part is now. So that's the reevaluation phase. And that person then starts it all over again. And so we can complete the memory.
Whoa, I mean, that is a lot. And with all this diving into trauma work, and even with the love and excitement that Patty has for it, we were wondering, how does she stay sane? How does she not carry it with her? And this led us to one of our newest segments called Treat Yourself.
Here we ask behavioral health practitioners how they find balance in their helping profession.
I love to cook. I love to read. I love to be with friends. I love to travel. I love to travel. My kids I have a daughter in college. I have one in high school. He plays lacrosse. And so we travel all over the country to see him play. And that's super fun, and all the fun that goes with that travel. So that's what I'm doing on my off hours. I actually like the country more than I do if I had to choose country or city, I would choose country. I'm more of an outdoorsy person. I love to horseback ride. That's where I'm going in a couple weeks, is we go to a ranch and we horseback ride and we golf and we shoot. And I really love to do that. Just being outside in nature is like my jam.
You can learn more about Patty and the Center for Insight and Connection by checking out the links in the show notes and description box.
Yeah, and this interview was over an hour and a half. So we are going to be putting the rest of this content on a blog post, including some videos that go over the top myths of EMDR. So make sure you check that stuff out too.
If you want to continue the conversation, join us in the Real Common Treatable Facebook group. It's a safe place to talk about all things with mental health, addiction, and substance abuse. Once again, I'm Clint Malley.
And I'm Lindsay Vass.
And we get it. This trauma thing is real, y'all, but it's also more common than you think. And most of all, it's treatable. We'll see you next time.